The air smelled of smoke and blood. Fires burned across the alien capital as the human ships hung like shadows in the sky. The war had ended too quickly for anyone to understand. One moment the alien forces believed themselves invincible, and the next they were kneeling in surrender. Among the defeated stood a young alien woman named Seraya, her red-marked skin glowing faintly under the flickering light of the ruins. She had been raised to believe humans were brutal and hungry for conquest, taking what they wanted without asking. But now she found herself standing before one. The human soldier was tall, his armor scratched and burned from battle. His name was Captain Elias Ward, and his orders were strange. Seraya had been given to him as a prize, a token of surrender from her own leaders. Her people's traditions called it a binding gift. Once accepted, she would belong to him completely. She expected him to look at her like she was a possession, but instead his eyes held no hunger, only calculation. "You're safe now," he said quietly, as if speaking to a wounded animal. Safe. The word felt strange on her tongue. She had been taught that safety never came from the enemy's mercy. Yet he had not touched her, not even when the guards pushed her forward and told him she was his. She waited for the moment when he would reach for her, claim her, and make her part of his victory. But he didn't. That night, Seraya sat in a small human tent, the sounds of celebration distant outside. The humans were not cruel. They offered her food, water, even warm blankets. Yet the unease inside her chest only grew. In her culture, being gifted meant being bound. Refusal was not kindness, it was humiliation. She could not understand why he would reject her without even speaking of it. The next morning, Elias left without a word, taking his squad to patrol the city. Seraya followed silently, her bare feet making no sound on the stone streets. She wanted to see what kind of human could be given a living gift and not take it. She watched him speak to civilians, giving orders to his men to guard the wounded, not loot the shops. She saw him carry an old alien man on his back when the man's legs failed. None of this matched the stories she had heard about humans. Later, when they returned to camp, she asked him directly, "Why do you not claim me?" He looked at her for a long time, his face unreadable. "Because you are not mine," he said simply. "And because you deserve a choice." A choice. That word had no place in the tradition she had been born into. If the roles were reversed, her people would have taken a human without hesitation, believing it their right. Yet here was a soldier who had defeated her world and still would not lay a hand on her. That night, Seraya lay awake, listening to the low hum of the human camp. Every movement of his shadow outside the tent drew her attention. Something inside her wanted to test him, to see if his restraint was real or a clever trick to lower her guard. She wondered how long he could resist if she pushed him. The next day, she walked beside him as he moved through the city again. But this time, the streets were not quiet. A group of alien loyalists emerged from the alleys, weapons hidden under their cloaks. In a single heartbeat, the calm shattered. Elias moved faster than she could see, pulling her behind him as shots rang out. His body became her shield, his arm holding her close as he returned fire. When it was over, 3 loyalists lay on the ground and the rest had fled. Elias checked her quickly, his hands gentle but firm. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice tense. She shook her head, but her heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the heat of his closeness. In that moment, she understood something dangerous. His touch, when it came, would not be out of greed or ownership. It would be out of choice, and that made it far more powerful than she had ever imagined. For the first time since being given away, Seraya felt a strange pull toward him. Not as a gift, not as a prize, but as someone who might one day choose to stand beside him. And she was not sure if that thought terrified her or thrilled her. The days that followed were uneasy. The war had ended, but the city was still broken. Smoke drifted from collapsed towers, and the air smelled of ash. Seraya walked through the ruins at Elias's side, still trying to understand him. Other humans in the camp treated her like a strange object, curious but distant. Only Elias seemed to act as if she were just another person, yet that did not erase the truth. She was still his gift. The council of her people had made it official. In their eyes, she belonged to him until he accepted or released her. No one had ever heard of a human refusing such a bond. That alone made her the subject of whispers among both humans and her own people. One evening, Elias called for her. She followed him to the edge of the city, where the outer walls had been torn open by explosions. Beyond the ruins lay the barren plains, scattered with the wreckage of war machines. The sun was low, painting the sky in red and gold. "I'm sending you away tomorrow," he said without turning to her. The words hit her like a blade. "Sending me away?" She asked. "You'll travel with a group of survivors to a safe zone. You'll be out of the city before the next wave of violence starts." She stepped in front of him, forcing him to meet her eyes. "So that's it? You take me from my home, and then you throw me aside?" His jaw tightened. "I didn't take you from your home. Your leaders handed you over. And I'm not throwing you aside, I'm making sure you survive." But survival was not the same as living. She could not accept the idea that he would simply give her away after refusing to claim her. Something inside her twisted at the thought. It was not pride. It was not tradition. It was something else, something she didn't want to name. That night she did not sleep. She kept replaying his words, his calm face, the way he stood between her and the loyalist attackers. If he truly felt nothing for her, why had his grip been so protective? Why had he shielded her like she was more than just a duty? At dawn, the camp stirred as soldiers prepared to move out. Seraya waited for Elias to give the order for her to leave. But before he could speak, shouts came from the north wall. A small group of humans had been ambushed during patrol, and reinforcements were needed. Without hesitation, Elias grabbed his rifle and headed for the wall. Seraya followed, ignoring the calls telling her to stay behind. When they reached the battle, the scene was chaos, blaster fire lighting the air, smoke covering the ground. She saw a soldier pinned behind rubble, unable to move. Before she could think, she ran forward, crawling through the debris until she reached him. She pulled him free, dragging him toward cover. A blast struck the ground near her, and she stumbled, but a strong hand caught her, Elias's hand. He pulled her close, his voice low and sharp. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," she answered, breathless. They fought side by side until the enemy fled. When it was over, Elias looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Something in his eyes was different. Now not just duty, not just restraint. Back at camp, he didn't speak to her until the sun had set. When he finally did, his voice was quieter than before. "You saved one of my men today. That's not something I'll forget." Seraya felt a small, dangerous warmth in her chest. She had wanted to provoke him, to break his control. Instead, she had earned something else's respect. And she wasn't sure which one she wanted more. Asterisk. The respect between them changed things. It was small at first. Elias would glance at her when giving orders, as if checking she understood. He would make sure she had water before leaving on patrol. These were small gestures, but Seraya noticed everyone. Still, the question remained. If he respected her now, why not accept the bond? In her world, respect and claim went together. Without one, the other felt incomplete. The next week brought a new threat. Human scouts reported that a large group of alien loyalists was gathering outside the city. They were heavily armed, and their goal was clear: retake the capital at any cost. The humans began fortifying their positions, placing soldiers on every wall. Elias was at the center of it, moving between posts, checking weapons. Giving orders, Seraya stayed close, refusing to be sent to the safe zone. Every time she argued, he would shake his head, but he no longer ordered her away. That was enough for her for now. On the third night, she found him alone near the supply tents, cleaning his rifle. The moonlight caught the lines of his face, making him look older, more tired. She sat beside him without speaking. For a while, the only sound was the soft click of metal and the distant hum of generators. Finally, she asked, "Why do you act like I matter if you will not keep me?" His hands paused. He set the rifle down and looked at her. "Because you do matter. And because keeping you like a prize isn't the same as protecting you." She frowned. "You think I'm weak. I think you've survived a war, seen your world fall, and still stand here asking questions. That's not weakness." The words struck her deeper than she expected. No one in her life had ever spoken to her like that. Not as a possession, not as a symbol, but as a person. She didn't know if she wanted to thank him or curse him for it. Before she could answer, a loud explosion shook the camp. Shouts filled the air as soldiers scrambled to their positions. Elias grabbed his rifle and was already moving toward the wall. Seraya followed, ignoring the voices telling her to stay behind. The loyalists had come earlier than expected, launching a surprise attack under the cover of darkness. Energy blasts lit the night sky, and the air was thick with smoke. Seraya stayed close to Elias, covering his back with a scavenged blaster. They moved together like they had trained for this moment, each step in rhythm. At one point, an enemy fighter broke through the line, charging straight toward them with a blade. Seraya stepped forward without thinking, firing once. The loyalist fell before reaching Elias. He turned to her, his face unreadable in the flickering light. "You're supposed to be in safety," he said, but his voice lacked anger. "This is my safety," she replied. They fought until the attack broke, and the enemy retreated into the night. When it was over, Elias placed a hand on her shoulder, not to claim, not to control, but as a steady anchor. It was the first time he had touched her without urgency, and it sent a strange heat through her chest. She didn't know what it meant yet. But she knew this. Each day, each battle, was pulling them closer to something neither of them could ignore. The night after the battle was strangely quiet. The city's ruins lay under a silver moon, and the campfires burned low. Most soldiers were sleeping, but Elias stayed awake, walking the perimeter. Seraya followed at a distance, watching how he moved, always alert, always scanning the shadows. When he finally noticed her, he sighed. "You should be resting." "So should you," she replied. They walked side by side along the broken wall. The wind was cold, carrying the faint smell of smoke from distant fires. She thought of how, only weeks ago, she had hated the sight of humans. Now she could not imagine facing the night without him near. "Why do you keep me close if you don't?" "Want me?" she asked. His steps slowed. "I never said I don't want you. I said you deserve a choice. That's not the same thing." Her heart skipped. "And if I choose to stay?" He looked at her then, his eyes steady in the moonlight. "Then I will protect you for as long as I can." The words warmed her, but before she could answer, a flare burst in the distance. The two of them hurried to the western gate, where a group of wounded aliens had arrived under human escort. Most were civilians, tired, hungry, afraid. Without hesitation, Elias began organizing food, blankets, and shelter for them. Seraya watched as he bent to speak to a frightened child, his voice gentle, his hands careful. She realized this was why he had not claimed her like a prize, because, to him, a life was something to guard, not to own. But not everyone saw it that way. Later that night, one of the alien elders approached her. "You shame your people by staying unclaimed," he hissed. "You were given to him. If he will not take you, then return to us." She met his glare without flinching. "I will not return." The elder's expression darkened. "Then you have chosen a human over your own blood." His words followed her long after he left. She found Elias near the supply crates, checking weapons. He noticed her troubled look but said nothing, waiting for her to speak. "Do you think I've betrayed my people?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "Surviving isn't betrayal. Choosing your own path isn't betrayal." That night, she sat outside his tent, unable to sleep. She thought of the bond tradition, the rules of her people, the cold way the elder had spoken. And she thought of Elias's restraint, his patience, his refusal to see her as an object. When the next attack came, it was sudden and brutal. Loyalist forces breached the southern gate under heavy fire. Elias grabbed his rifle, and without hesitation, Seraya was at his side. They fought in the narrow streets, each covering the other's back. At one point, an explosion threw them both to the ground. Dust and heat filled the air. She felt his arm around her, pulling her close, shielding her from falling debris. His breath was harsh in her ear, his body tense against hers. And for a brief, dangerous moment, she felt what it would be like if he did claim her, not as a prize, but as something far deeper. When they finally reached safety, neither spoke of it, but the look they shared in the darkness said everything words could not. The southern gate attack had left the camp on edge. Supplies were running low, soldiers were exhausted, and everyone knew the Loyalists would strike again. Elias moved like a man carrying the weight of the entire city on his back. Seraya stayed close, watching the lines deepen on his face each day. One night, as the camp settled into uneasy silence, Elias called her into his tent. The air inside smelled faintly of gun oil and dust. He was sitting on the edge of his bedroll, cleaning his sidearm. "We have to leave the city," he said. "The next attack will be worse. If we stay, we won't survive." Her stomach tightened. "You mean we?" "Yes, you and me. My unit's being reassigned to hold the outer pass. I'm taking you with me." She wanted to ask why now, after all this time, he would take her with him instead of sending her away. But the look in his eyes stopped her. There was no hesitation, no distance. Only certainty. The journey began before dawn. They moved through the ruins quietly, avoiding streets where Loyalist patrols might be hiding. The air was cold, their breath visible in the pale light. Seraya kept pace without complaint, her eyes scanning the shadows the way he had taught her. Halfway to the pass, they heard movement. Figures appeared from the rubble-armed Loyalists, blocking the road. Elias grabbed her hand without thinking and pulled her behind cover. "Stay down," he whispered, but the Loyalists had already seen them. Blaster fire tore through the wall above their heads. Elias returned fire, moving with sharp, controlled bursts. Seraya picked up a fallen weapon, her hand steady. She covered his flank, just as she had during the last battle. One of the Loyalists broke through, lunging at her with a blade. She twisted away, the edge grazing her arm, and fired point blank. The man dropped. Elias was beside her in an instant, his hand gripping her shoulder, checking her for wounds. "You're bleeding," he said. "It's nothing," she answered. Though her pulse was racing, they fought their way out, running until the city was far behind them. When they finally stopped to catch their breath, the silence was overwhelming. They stood in the shadow of a cliff, the sky darkening above. Elias's hand was still on her arm, his thumb brushing over the shallow cut. "You could have been killed," he said, his voice low. "So could you," she replied. For a moment, neither moved. The air between them felt heavy, charged with something they had both been avoiding for too long. His hand lingered on her skin. His gaze locked on hers. She could see the battle in his eyes, the urge to close the distance, and the discipline that kept him still. "You don't make this easy," he said finally, stepping back. "Maybe I'm not supposed to." She answered softly. They made camp under the cliff, building a small fire. As they sat in the flickering light, Seraya studied him. Every line of his face, every movement of his hands felt sharper, more defined. The thought of losing him, of never hearing his voice again, was something she could no longer bear. That night, as the wind howled over the rocks, she lay awake, inches from him. The space between them felt like a barrier she wanted to cross, even if it meant breaking every rule of her people and his. She didn't know if he would ever reach for her first. But she knew this: if he didn't, soon she would have to. The cold at the cliffside camp was sharp enough to bite through their blankets. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the night was silent except for the wind. Elias hadn't slept. He sat with his rifle resting on his knee, eyes scanning the dark. Seraya lay nearby, pretending to sleep but watching him through half-closed eyes. They had been moving together for days now, crossing dangerous ground. Each time trouble came, he put himself between her and danger without a second thought. Each time, she wondered how much longer he could keep the wall between them. Near dawn, the sound came, a distant rumble, like thunder under the earth. Elias tensed instantly. "They've found us," he said, his voice low. Loyalists poured from the shadows moments later, their armor dark against the pale light. Blaster fire cracked in the cold air. Elias shoved Seraya toward the rocks. "Stay down," he ordered. But she didn't. She was at his side, firing at the attackers, moving as he moved. The fight was fierce, and the enemy pressed hard. A shot struck the rock beside Elias's head, and Seraya grabbed his arm, pulling him into cover. When the last loyalist fell, the silence felt unreal. They were both breathing hard, smoke rising from their weapons. Elias turned to her, and for once, there was no guarded distance in his eyes, only the raw truth of a man who had nearly lost something he could not bear to lose. "You saved my life," he said, "and you've saved mine more times than I can count," she replied. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Then, slowly, Elias reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His hand lingered against her cheek, warm even in the freezing air. "I told myself I wouldn't take what wasn't freely given," he said, "and I told myself I wouldn't beg for what should be offered," she answered. Something shifted between them then, breaking the invisible line they had both guarded so fiercely. He pulled her into his arms, not out of victory, not out of tradition, but because he wanted to. Her hands gripped his armor, holding him as if letting go would end the world. When they finally pulled back, her voice was steady. "You said I had a choice. This is it. I choose you." His answer was simple. "Then you're mine because I choose you too." They left the cliff that morning, walking side by side into the rising sun. Behind them lay war, broken cities, and the rules of two worlds. Ahead of them was something neither had planned, for a bond made not by surrender or custom, but by choice. And for Seraya, that made it unbreakable.